Hey everyone, it is Carl, and this is the working hour. It's Wednesday afternoon again. I want to welcome everyone who's watching live and everyone who watches the recording afterwards. Actually, I've been getting a lot of feedback from people who are actually watching at their leisure, so that's fantastic. Today, we're going to bring Gene back in again, and we're going to be talking about kind of how to become the CEO of your own career. So why don't we go and bring Gene in real quick here now and do that.
Hey there.
Hey, Gene, how are you today?
Good. How are you?
Doing good. By the way, Gene, if you don't know this, Gene is my wife. We've got a very interesting background in the sense that we were both HR leaders and actually know a lot of stuff. Our dinner conversations tend to be very interesting. So, so Gene, why don't we start off and well, why don't you tell people in case they don't know what you do, um, a little bit about the work that you're doing now.
Yeah, sure. So I help both executives, corporate executives, and business owners um, make decisions like a CEO, also build their teams and grow their revenue.
Cool, cool,
Yeah.
cool. So, I know you and I before we went live and stuff. I went into your office. We sat down. We talked a little bit about how we wanted to approach our discussion today, and it's kind of funny that we were talking about kind of being the CEO of your career and taking basically taking ownership of your career. And I know in the work that I've done and just in um, my corporate experience, so many people really don't take ownership uh, for their careers, and they're a lot of times unhappy at what's going on or the direction that their career is going, but yet they haven't taken any ownership or leadership for that. So, tell me a little bit about kind of you know some of the things that you would suggest to our audience today.
Yeah, sure. So first, I want to say it's not about blaming anybody, right? I know you and I grew up with very familiar backgrounds as an immigrant and as a child of an immigrant. Um, we were told that if you found a good company, right, you would work really hard, and in exchange, the company would take care of you
Oh
forever
yeah.
and ever until you're retired, right? And I think that that ideal is no longer the norm for most of us. And so I think it's really important because of that to really take ownership of your career and no longer wait for the company to drive that, but understand that you're in the driver's seat of your career choices and your career future. And
Mhm.
so I think I want to start there with just saying it's I think a mindset shift for a lot of us, right? In our generation, definitely to think of it that way. And so, what was your question again?
I guess the question is kind of what are some of the things that you would kind of talk about, or what
Mhm.
would be some of the things you would advocate people kind of doing to being how to become the CEO of your career. And I think you brought up a really great point when you talked about that paradigm shift that has actually happened where the things that you and I learned as kids and growing up, and even when I started my career, it was like you need to get with a good company, you need to be there, and you spend your life. And I actually worked for a company. Um, they used to give out gold watches, and when the business turned
Mhm.
and turned rather dramatically for them, they had all these gold watches and stuff. But I had the pleasure of meeting people who had you know 20, 25, 35-year careers at the company,
Mhm.
and took retirement packages and doing that. But that's just not how our society and how business works these days. So I guess the first thing I want to talk about is a little bit about kind of owning your career development
Yeah,
and kind of how important that is.
yeah, yeah. And so, well, I think generally speaking, I think it's good to be a partner to your manager into your company, um, in how you want to develop your career. I think it's good to have those conversations if they're not happening, to start those conversations and ask for them. You could do so, practically speaking, by asking your manager, if you can schedule a conversation, right? And have those at least a couple of times a the year. And you can ask proactively about your performance, how you're doing against goals, and how you are progressing, and then ask for their feedback on kind of where they see you long term with the company as well. And voice your opinion about where you see yourself going, where your interests are, and maybe where the gaps are, like how do you get there, what kind of training you would need. um, I think those are kind of some of the foundations, I would say, for those conversations.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, from I think from a career development standpoint, and again, given our backgrounds in HR and mine in training and development, I know that I used to have, goal setting meetings with my team in the beginning of the year, and where we would sit down, we would talk about the overarching goals of what the business were, what the department was, and then individual goals, what I wanted to see my team kind of accomplish. And it was the corporate goals and my goals broken down so that they could help me and facilitate us being successful.
Yeah.
And quarterly, we would go and we would sit down. I would try to do it quarterly. Sometimes it wasn't 3 months on the dot, maybe it was 4 months, but at least 3 to 4 times a year, have repeat discussions with my team to find out how they were doing, where they were having issues or problems, and where I could remove roadblocks or help them figure out what they needed to do. And during that time, I always welcomed them to kind of talk about what was working for them, what wasn't working for them, and how I saw them in the future, kind of taking leadership roles within my team, or taking on more responsibility within my team. Unfortunately, a lot of managers don't do that.
Yeah.
And
And I think that's a great model. I think the reality is that, a lot of us, when we started being managers, we didn't get training, right? So we were trying to figure things on our own. Um, and I think a lot of companies that are out there, I know I worked for companies that had a very structured process on how you were supposed to talk to employees about their development, their performance. There were certain times of the years you did that, but there are companies that don't have that, right?
yeah,
And so it's kind of the wild, wild west as far as like when people talk to you or not talk to you. And so I think that's why it's so important to, um, remind ourselves that we're empowered to start those conversations if they're not happening, um, and that we should be doing that if it's not happening, as opposed to maybe defaulting to thinking the company always knows best, or they'll take care of me, or just being unhappy if things are not going the way you want them to be going, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think absolutely. And I think one of the main things, really one of the main takeaways for this discussion is that, we as employees need to really own our progression and own how we want to move forward within the organization or outside the organization,
Hmm.
or figure out what our career journey is going to be, and actually make that happen and set ourselves some goals too.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're not saying we're being naive about the fact that we can do whatever we want, right? Like, obviously, we need a supporting manager, a supporting organization that's going to support our goals, right? And
Mhm.
we need some alignment between the company and ourselves. Um, but if those conversations are happening on a regular basis, if you're asking for those conversations to happen, you at least know where you stand, and you know that you know whether or not the way you see yourself is the way the company sees you, and you don't have to spend 20 years in a company that maybe doesn't value the way you should be valued, right?
Yeah.
Which I know work with folks sometimes who wake up 20 years later and are sitting in a situation like that. And we want you to feel empowered, right? To not feel like that's the only option you have.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because we were talking with somebody a few weeks ago, and they took a look at my website. They had gone and they looked at the we were actually at dinner and everything. We were kind of talking about what you and I do and everything. And they actually went to my website to go take a look at it. And they started reading the text on my website. And they were like, "Yep, that's me. Yep, that's me. Yep, that's me." And the funny thing is, you know, a lot of people think they are stuck and they're the only ones in this position and they're the only ones that are stuck.
Mhm.
And you and I both know that's not the case. There's a lot of people that actually struggle with this stuff in taking ownership and being a CEO for their own career and being able to advocate for themselves or how to advocate for themselves.
Yeah, 100%. I think that for many of us, we bought into the idea that the company has all the power, right? And
Mm.
this is true in our careers, in compensation, when we're doing interviews, which I know is something you help people with. Um, you know, we're either made to feel or we come to feel like we have zero power in those transactions, right? And the reality is that it's not true, right? The company needs you as much as you need them. You're interviewing the company as much as the company is interviewing you in those situations. So it's a two-way street. And I think the earlier we realize that, the more empowered we're going to feel and the more confident we're going to feel, right, in our careers.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you know, you and I both have master's degrees in human resources and stuff. And there's one thing that just sticks with me from when I started my studies all those years ago, and I won't
Mhm.
go in on how long ago that was, but it's there's one thing I remember one of my professors telling me about. I grew up in New York, went to school in New York and everything. And one of the things we talked about was right to hire. And it's right to hire, right to work kinds of things. And we always joked around it was not just right to hire, it was right to fire. But it's also a right to walk away when you wish to walk away. So
Yes.
this to to that point, it's a two-way street. You don't have to stay in a place that you're unhappy with, or it's not giving you what you need or what you should be getting or what you deserve.
Yes.
And I think that goes into the next thing is, what are some of the hallmarks or some of the signs people should be looking at, whether or not it's, oh, hey, we should kind of stick this out and maybe I should stay and things are moving in the right direction, or saying, "Hey, this is a dumpster fire here, and I need to start looking at other options and stuff." And I know I use the term dumpster fire, and there are a lot of companies out there that are quote unquote admired companies, and you get in there and their company culture is a bit of a dumpster fire.
Yeah. I would say that's, to me, that's number one in my experience and in the experience of the people that we've hired. I think the benefit we have is that, I mean, sorry, not that we hired, that we coach. I think the benefit that we have is that when you coach enough people, you start hearing the same themes, right? And I think something that really makes people regret staying somewhere longer is if they were mistreated, right? If the company culture was toxic. I would say that's probably one of the signs that I would say it's really worth looking at the situation, um, not trying to avoid making a difficult decision and seeing if you have other options where, you can go back to market, see what other jobs may be available. That may be, one of the situations to consider what other options you have. I think most other situations, you can obviously sit, assess, you can think about where you see yourself in your career and your progression, your potential, your performance, and compare that to how the company sees you. Obviously, there's room to change that. But if you've been somewhere for a while and you see yourself performing at a certain level and the company doesn't see you that way, it might be time to self-assess, to get feedback, to hire a coach. I mean, there's many things that could happen, um, but in other instances, it's time to make a change. Um, yeah, but I think company culture is kind of one of those closer to black and white things. Would you agree?
No, I definitely would, and I think one of the biggest issues, and I think one of the biggest things that we as both you and I were employees and stuff. Sometimes we tend to hold on thinking we can fix things
Mm-hmm.
or that this is fixable,
Mm-hmm.
and we always internalize it and saying it's a me thing, and a lot of times it's not a me thing, it's just a bad fit. And
Yeah.
I think the sooner that we come to the realization and the knowledge that saying, hey, this may not be the right environment for me, and then self self choose to leave is always better. And I think a lot of times people wait for things to happen. Do you find that is being the case?
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of times the the trauma that we're seeing, and I use that word on purpose, right? Like people that we work with sometimes have trauma from really bad work experiences. Um, there were signs along the way, but I think as humans, we always want to give people the benefit of the doubt, right? And this maybe people have seen other people be mistreated before, right? But maybe they had a good manager that kind of sheltered them from that. But then once the manager leaves, then they kind of get it from the next person. Or, there's similar situations where there are signs. And it's kind of a saying, when people tell you who they are, believe them. If you see a lot of signs, then it's time to start kind of assessing what's going on in the broader picture of things, right?
Hmm.
Um, I would say that's like one thing.
Okay. What are some of the signs do you think people should look at and kind of have their antenna up for?
Mhm. Um, well, I think number one is anything toxic, right? Like if you're working for somebody or your boss is working for somebody that is like a screamer, a shouter, somebody that belittles people, somebody that just mistreats people as humans, right, in general. And those people are getting rewarded, promoted, accolades. Then you have to think about, are the values of the company that is promoting people like that, are those aligned with who I am as a person
Hmm.
and the kind of company I want to be in, right? Um, so I'd say that's like a fundamental thing, right? Ethics are another thing, kind of similar to, is a company doing unethical things that I don't want to be involved in, right? Um, those are, I think, again, closer to black and white. Um, I think for other things is one we see very often because we coach high potential people are companies where people who are not performing get rewarded by not being coached and challenged to do more. And high performers get punished by being given more than their fair share of work.
Yeah. And
So, yeah.
go ahead. No, no,
No, no.
I totally agree. And I mean, I was thinking about this earlier, and then you brought it up now, and I'm sorry I jumped in here, but I honestly that it's the classic catch 22. You're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't.
Mhm.
Because a lot of times your top performers, you have them in a role that's so key and so important that what ends up happening is that it's like, oh, I need this person to do that, and they're perfect for this. They need to stay there.
Mhm.
Yet when you need to make moves, the logical choice should be, hey, I'm going to move this person up and I'm going to figure it out.
Mhm.
Or I've done the right thing and I've trained a successor. And, the one thing I always told my staff is the reason I'm training you to do the work that I do is because A, I don't plan to be here for an extended period of time. And it's not that I was planning on leaving, I was planning on getting promoted and getting up and out. Um, But the other part of it, and I told them this to kinda to hammer it home, what if something catastrophic happened? What if something happened that I could not be there for whatever reason? I
Mhm.
got hurt or something even more dire, and I did a lot of traveling for work, so that could very well be a possibility where I would be detained or I couldn't get into the country or something like that.
Mhm.
I needed them to continue to do what they're doing. But unfortunately, so many times it happens that people they get pigeonholed and that they can't get out of that pigeonhole.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point. There's the I'm gonna hold my good performers back, right? Because I need them because I can't run the department without them. And I was talking maybe a little bit more of I'm gonna give all the work that's not getting done by other people in my department to the good performers.
Yeah.
And then you see a lot of burnout, right? Of maybe the high performers not wanting to say no, right? Not wanting to be seen as not being team players, or just being people that struggle with saying no, right? And just taking on more than a person can possibly do, right? So um, it's unfortunate because we do see a lot of burnout, but I think a lot of times is not the person necessarily having bad working habits. It's just that the volume is completely unreasonable.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right, and I think, you know, how can I best put it? You and I've seen it where it's happened to people we've worked with and stuff like that, where again, they've been taken advantage of
Hmm.
just because a manager can't do the things that they need to do in the sense of actually leading a team, and a lot of times it's not their fault, they just don't have the skills to do that. uh, so I think that's really important. I think you brought some really great points up. The other thing, just in some of the notes that we put down and when we were talking about this, was kind of, I think some of the assessment that needs to kind of happen and go on is you need to assess whether or not the situation you're in, because you talked about a little bit about culture,
Hmm.
and I thought this was very interesting in the sense that, I think there needs to be some assessment going on from you, the individual, on, is this a bad manager?
Hmm.
Is this somebody that needs to be developed and trained themselves and they just haven't gotten it? Are they abusive? Are they this? Are they that? Or is it a bad company culture? And I think sometimes it can be, going back to the catch 22, sometimes it is a bad manager and they fly under the radar. They're able to sell themselves to their bosses as being in control
Yeah.
and being good and all this stuff, and everything's fine and all that until something blows up.
Hmm.
And then their manager has to deal with it. Or a situation where you have, um, you know, a bad company culture. And sometimes it's kind of hard to see the bad company culture because, they do a really good job at PR and talking about all the good things that they do and everything. But I guess the question I have is, if a company tolerates a bad manager and tolerates a bad leader that's abusive and all that stuff, is it aligned with their company culture? And is that really is it is it really a culture issue?
Yeah. I mean, listen, I wanted to just make sure that we say, like, no manager is going to be perfect, right? We're all struggling to be the best performers we can be, right?
Yeah,
And so we're not necessarily talking about that. Um, I always encourage people to talk to their managers, to work with their managers. Um, if they're overworked, usually the manager is overworked as well, right? So we're not talking about those instances. I think you're talking about situations where people are literally toxic and abusive, and they're just kind of getting away with it. And the
yeah,
reality is, some companies don't really care as long as the manager's producing the results they want, right? As long as the money is being made. And I think that if you see that, um, you know, and it keeps on happening, then I think that tells you something about the culture,
yeah.
you know.
No, I
And I'm not here to tell anybody what to do, but it would tell me something about the culture, and yeah.
yeah, no, I agree, and I think it's one of those things where I think people have to be vigilant in the sense that they need to understand and they need to keep their eyes open to these things. They need to take off the rose-colored glasses and say, "Hey, you know, maybe I do need to make changes. Maybe I need to do something different." Um, you know, I think sometimes as employees, I think we do a poor job in asking for what we need from our employer
Mm-hmm.
or how to have those discussions and how to have and broach those subjects and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. Um, you know, how would you how would you go if we had to role play here? How would you role play in having that discussion with a a manager and saying, "Hey, I need some support in developing my skills."
Yeah. Um,
I'm sorry if I put you on the
no,
spot
no,
there and
no. I
stuff.
mean, it actually, the reason I'm looking to the side is because it actually made me think of actually I think, a more difficult situation, which was, I was in a team where um, I thought the team was high performing, but I thought everybody was kind of doing their own thing, and we didn't have any kind of cohesion, um, which I think was an issue because we all traveled. So when we traveled, we kind of had to do the work we were doing while we're traveling, and our clients group were not necessarily getting the face time they needed, and it just felt like we could use a little bit more support, right, internally from team members. And I remember having that conversation with my manager, in asking for more support, and feeling like it was a personal failure at the time, that I needed more support, right? And that, because those conversations were not necessarily had or encouraged, and I'm not saying the manager is doing anything wrong. I just don't think that's necessarily something we talk about all the time. And so, but to their credit, they were really receptive to the conversation, right? And in hindsight, it really wasn't a personal failure. It was just something that could make the team stronger, right? Um, and he started doing different things so that the teams, the team members that were local could help support the people that were traveling at that point, right? And we all took
Mhm.
turns traveling, so it was kind of us, everybody helping everybody. And I think that created a better environment for the people working there and also for the customers. And so, yeah, so it just made me think of that sometimes it's difficult to have those discussions because we think it's something wrong with us, like you said before, but it's really not, right? It's
Yeah.
just the situation. um
No, I totally agree with you. I think a lot of times, so many times we internalize things, and what
mhm,
ends up happening is because we internalize these things, we look at them as personal failures, and
mhm,
we look at it as it was just something that had come to mind on my end was you know, saying, okay, if I ask for help, that means I'm not competent.
Yeah.
And it's far from the truth.
Yeah.
Being a leader is actually being able to say, I need help, and this is how you can help me.
Yeah.
And that in of itself is something to raise up, and something that's important to shine a light on, and saying, hey, because you're asking for help does not make you weak. It does not make you incompetent. It does not make you anything other than a good leader. You're asking for resources. Now, whether or not they can give you those resources
Yeah.
is another thing,
100%.
and then goes into the whether or not you need to stay there or not.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah,
Yeah. I mean, sometimes people make their own investment on resources, right? Like sometimes there's something you need or that you want that the company is not able or willing to give you. And I know people hire their own coaches, for example. And coaches come at all different price ranges, right? If there's something that people want to work specifically on, or they take classes, on their own, or do certain things that people know are going to be good for their career. One resource that I think is always great is to work on having a mentor, somebody that internally you see as being effective in the organization and whose style you like, right? Feels honest
mhm,
and truthful to you. I think that's always fantastic. And if you can, having a champion, right, as well. I think those are two things that are great to have because it gives you an opportunity to bounce ideas off somebody that's not necessarily your supervisor, and maybe
yeah,
helps you with giving you guidance on how to move through the network, right? That is the company culture.
yeah. No,
Mhm.
I totally agree, and I think I think having an internal mentor within the organization is so powerful.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, a lot of organizations don't have a formal way of pairing mentors and mentees together and doing
Mhm.
that. I think a lot goes into that, because you can have a match that just is not a good match in certain things, and it's okay to say, "Hey, I'm going to be a mentee," or "I'm going to be a mentee of somebody," and then realize, "Hey, I've gotten what I need from this relationship. Maybe it's time I switch it up and do that." And I think it's a great point. I think the other thing you brought up was a champion.
Mhm.
So can you tell the people who are listening, what do you mean by a champion in the organization?
So a mentor is somebody that you can bounce ideas off, and it's more of the way I see it, more of a personal relationship in the sense that what you discuss is not really shared outside the conversation, right? Um, you hope they keep your confidence so that you can honestly discuss the things that are in your mind, and they can help you navigate the culture and the politics, and be more effective at your job. A champion is somebody that believes in you and speaks your name in the rooms you're not in, basically. So when decisions are being made about promotions or opportunities or cool projects, the champion is there and they know who you are, they know what you can do, and they bring up your name and say, so and so would be great for this project because XYZ. And so it's a kind of a next level thing, right? Sometimes the
Yeah.
mentor can be a champion, but sometimes it's different people.
No, and it's it's kind of funny because you sometimes it's the mentor, sometimes it's different people within the organizations. Sometimes the person who honestly should be the biggest champion for people should be their own supervisors, and
Hmm.
talking up their staff and saying, "Hey,"
Hmm.
and doing those things. And I think of times when I sat in a room and I was I had to be the advocate for people that were either on my team, and given the nature of the roles that I've held, I've had to become the champion for other people where sometimes the managers were sitting right across the way from me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I basically had to say, "Yeah, you've got a really good guy here, and let me tell you why. Boom, 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 boom. And these are the things I can't train, but
Yeah.
they're things that you could do differently and
Yeah.
do that."
Yeah, it could also be a previous boss, right? It could be somebody that you explicitly asked to champion you, right? So it's not something that we should be afraid of having a conversation about.
Mhm.
It could be something we do proactively and ask for. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, one of the things we talked about earlier was, something that I think people a lot of times just don't do,
Hmm.
and that is betting on yourself. I think we as humans, unless you are super confident and you have, you have this confidence about you, being able to bet on yourself sometimes becomes difficult. And a lot of times it's because there's just a lot of things, a lot of responsibility that you feel pressure kind of maybe keeping you down and stuff like that. What can you say to people out there about betting on themselves and taking that next step and how to take that next step?
Yeah. I think it's really important to be our biggest fans and really realize that everybody's kind of struggling to live their life, right, to deal with the challenges that are coming their way. Most people are not out there to not be our champions, right? um, but maybe they're not necessarily paying attention to what we're doing at all, and maybe the times even when they need to. And so we have to advocate for ourselves. um, I know I grew up with the idea of let your work speak for you, and I think that's an outdated way of thinking. Personally, I
Mhm.
think you have to speak up, right, for yourself, and find people and find rooms where you're supported. And again, the count is not going to be too high, right? Like there's not actually, and it's sad to say, but maybe not a lot of people are happy when we're successful, when we win, when we get promoted. But there are people that would be happy for you, and nurture those relationships, because they just keep reminding you of all the things you have to give, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's important. I also think it's important to do the work and be very kind of um, intentional, is the word I was looking for, about it. Get clear about the things you're good at. Get clear about the value you add. Ask for feedback for people that you have a good working relationship with. Get clear why they like doing business with you, and understanding your unique value proposition, that what you really bring to the team that's unique to you. Because I think that also helps your confidence.
No, I definitely agree. And I think one of the biggest I think one of the biggest things that a lot of people have a problem with is
Mhm.
actually asking for help or believing that it's the company's responsibility to develop me, to do the things, to help me progress and do that. And to a certain extent that may be true, but the truth of the matter is, if and you've seen it and I've seen it, if people don't take ownership and be the CEO of their career and get the training, get the help that they need, and they just muddle through, a lot of times it ends up holding them back.
Mhm.
It ends up them not getting the positions or getting the jobs that they are desiring or hoping for, getting those promotions and doing that stuff because they're either afraid or believe that this should be happening for them automatically. Do you agree with that, or have you seen something different?
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, should the companies be doing XYZ? Maybe, right? But if it's not happening, it I think we have two options. We can sit there and be angry about it, Or we can say, well, maybe this is not the way it should be, and then do something about it so we feel empowered about it. And I think we need to look at our careers as this thing that is independent from one company, right? It's living our purpose. It's the work that we do matters, right? And so it's our contribution to the world. And so I'm looking at my career as a trajectory, right, holistically, as opposed to being tied to one specific company or one specific job. And so if a company or a point in time doesn't fit my overall vision for my career, um,
Mhm.
then I can make decisions based on that, right?
Yeah.
But it's not the end all be all, right?
Yeah. I think it's a fundamental shift that that we all need to make, is that we are our own business. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter if you are an entrepreneur or if you own your own business. Uh, it doesn't matter if you work for a company. It's you Inc.,
Yes.
right? You
I agree.
Incorporated, and being you incorporated, you need to look out for your best interests. And you need to look out for making sure that your bottom line is being met, and not just the other company that you work for, that their bottom line is being met. That making sure that your business is growing or your career is growing, and that you need to basically run your career like a business almost.
I think I've heard myself say that before too. Um, so yes, I'm a big
I only quote and I only quote and put forward things that brilliant people have said.
thank you.
So you're welcome.
Yes, I'm a big proponent of that mindset, right? You are your most valuable product. You have to take care of yourself for that reason. And you have to understand who your clients are. You have to understand what your value proposition is. And that doesn't change if you are working for somebody else, right? It doesn't matter if you're working for individual clients, for different companies, if you're an entrepreneur, or if you work for a company that gives you a paycheck every 15 days, right? It's the same premise. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. And it's one of those things where I think a lot of times people just kind of miss that fact, that there needs to be some personal responsibility. There needs to be some action on your part to propel this forward. And sometimes it's going to take massive action or massive amounts of energy to do this, and realize it's not easy stuff to do, especially even just coming to the realization and the thought is actually half the battle, because a
Yeah.
lot of times we just struggle with it in doing that.
But I also want to say, I don't think it needs to be hard, right? I think it can also be empowering to come to the realization that you are the boss of your career. Um, and I think even making little steps, little changes
Yeah,
can be empowering, right? Can start getting you moving in the right direction.
yeah,
It doesn't have to be sweeping changes necessarily all the time, but I think sometimes the issue is that there's a lot of negativity talk around work, right? And there's like maybe a subculture of like, I hate my job kind of thing. And if we hang around people that kind of say that all the time, we kind of think, well, I guess that's the price we pay for being an adult, right? We are supposed to hate our work. But there's also people that love their work, right? And if we're surrounded by those people, then we start kind of thinking of bigger things for ourselves and maybe wanting bigger things for ourselves.
mhm,
So I think both things are an option.
yeah. And I think what I was getting to with the taking of massive action and massive change, I think part of that is just getting to the point of saying, I need to make a change. I think what ends up happening, I think we put up with a lot of stuff before we get to that decision point of
Mhm.
saying, I need to make a change. I need to do something different. I need to learn some skills. I need to do things differently because this is not working for me. But the truth of the matter is once you take that step, and
Mhm.
sometimes to your point, it can be a bunch of little steps that get you to making that change.
Mhm.
But I think once people make that change and they kind of make that step forward, it becomes almost liberating in certain ways.
Yeah, I agree.
So, I think that's very, very important for people to understand and realize and kind of have that kind of percolate in their heads a little bit.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I agree.
so is there anything else that you think that people need to know about, kind of being their own CEO of their career and some other tips that you could share with some other people or some of the people here?
Um, I think one thing I would say is sometimes you're asking a question, right, of your company, of your manager, of the business, and you're not getting what you may call a direct answer, but you're still getting an answer. So pay attention to the answer. Like you're still getting an answer. Do you understand what I
Uh,
mean by that?
so I think I do, and maybe let me see if I can translate. Um, so I'm a big music person and stuff like that. But sometimes it's the things that are not being said or
Correct.
the way things are being said is actually giving you an answer. They're
Yes.
answering your question, but they're not directly answering it because they're trying to be nice or they're trying to avoid a difficult conversation.
Yes. There's a
And I
thing
think,
called a lot of avoiding difficult conversations that we all do, right? We don't want to
oh yeah,
disappoint people. We don't want to make them sad or upset, or we don't know how to do the difficult conversation. So I think sometimes things are conversations that need to be had are avoided, and I think that's still if you're getting ignored, that's still a message, right? And we have to pay
yeah.
attention to those messages.
It's kind of funny because we in this. I mean, we could sit for another. I mean, we've been on now for almost 48 minutes. I mean, we could have a whole other conversation about difficult conversations or crucial conversations, and maybe that's something we can do at a later time about the importance of having these crucial conversations, not only as a leader but as an individual and talking to your managers and doing those things. Um, I've got a whole bookshelf next to me here of things about leadership and having crucial conversations and doing those things. But I think that's key is a lot of times managers and companies they really try to avoid having those difficult conversations because it can open up a can of worms that they don't want to necessarily deal with at that time.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I mean, to your point, yes. I think we do as humans in personal relationships, and to your point, there's liability that the company is worried about. So there's another layer. Um, and thank you, Amy, for the support. So yeah, I think you're 100% right. Yeah.
oh, cool. So we're kind of coming to the end. First, I want to do a shout out. We have the first person who jumped on here um, was Maximo, who I think is actually from Equatorial Guinea,
Oh, cool.
which so I think that's cool. And Amy, who actually I worked with in two jobs, who is I mean fantastic. And Amy, when it comes to some books on difficult conversations, one of the books that I advocate and I think would be really good would be a book called Crucial Conversations. I think it would be a great starting point for you to kind of look at and do that. They actually hold courses on crucial conversations and doing those conversations. Um, so there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. So I hope that actually helps. And Amy, thank you very much about joining in and watching us today and everything. So
And can I say I know this may sound unrelated, but in my mind it's related. Um, it's a book called Boundaries, um, by the woman that created the Whole 30, Melissa Urban, I believe. Because I think sometimes having those difficult conversations is about our boundaries getting crossed and defining when they get crossed, etc. So I find that it helps as well.
cool.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank everyone who was live with us today. Maximo and Amy, Jean, I want to thank you as well. One thing I want to go and I want to ask Jean, what's the best way people can reach out to you and do that?
Yeah, they can go to my website, jeanali.com, or my socials are Ask Jean Ali. So, yeah, I'm usually on LinkedIn or Instagram or Facebook. So, wherever you want to look for me, I'm there.
Okay, cool. We do have a few little housekeeping stuff that we'll do as well here. Um, you know, one of the things I will tell you again, if you want to go check out my website, I'll flash it up there too. Just scan the code and you can go and you can get to my website and see some of the things that I'm working on, and you can always go back and catch I guess the podcast version of this live stream where you can listen to it later on as well. The other thing is, if you haven't realized, we are actually in quote unquote hiring season, a time when managers and supervisors need to uh, kind of finish up their hiring for the year. Otherwise, they're going to lose their headcount. Uh, and it's actually a great time to start to look for work. I've actually put a package together of hiring season essentials. It focuses on your resume, a job strategy, and interviewing, the things that you need to nail down to be successful in getting hired, and shortening the time from when you need to, from when you start your search to when you end. And again, we could talk a whole time about the frustration and the psychology behind this and everything. uh, but again, a great opportunity for you to get some additional training and some of the things that um, you can do to kind of progress your career forward, as we were talking about being the CEO of your own company. So, with that, Gene, thank you so much. Is there anything you want to say in conclusion? Uh,
No, thank you so much for having me. And I think it's a great offer you have, because I know people have paid you triple, quadruple that for just the interview portion alone. So I think it's great what you're doing.
Yeah. Now, and it's kind of one of the things that I'm very proud of is, um, I think I'm thinking it's at 100%, if not 95% of my clients that I've worked with. Uh, if we've worked one on one or they've gone and they've done a course, they've gotten their investment back and then some.
Yeah.
And I think it's a great opportunity to help develop yourself. And then, when you do make that change and when you go ask for what you deserve and stuff, to be able to recoup that, I think that's a great thing.
Yeah.
So, um, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. This actually was our 10th live stream, so let's celebrate that.
Yeah.
This was a huge change for me. I've been hesitant for years to do live streams and to do podcasts and stuff like that. So this was really coming out of my comfort zone. Amy, goodbye. Take care. Um, it really was coming out of my comfort zone. I know, Gene, for you too, this is something that you're working on as well, to kind of come out of your comfort zone and stuff like that. I have to say, I can't believe I've done this for 10 weeks straight. and I'm really excited about continuing this and honestly having you and having other people as guests too.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much. We ran a lot over. We had a lot of stuff to discuss and to talk about. And again, have a wonderful week. It is Labor Day coming up this Monday. If you haven't, check out my blog post. I did a blog post on Labor Day. I geeked out a little bit. I'll be honest. So catch that and have a great week. Have a great holiday weekend and be safe. Take care, everyone.